This is a video presentation of Bible 2114, Unit number 11, entitled Egypt and the Exodus. In this presentation, a vast amount of material will be covered from the books of Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. Students should read pages 151 through 203 in the text Erdman's Handbook to the Bible. As a result of this lecture, the student should know the call of Moses, the conflict of God with the Egyptians, and the deliverance of Israel, the route of Exodus, and the difficulty involved in trying to locate that route, the wilderness wanderings, and the laws and the tabernacle. Your speaker today is Dr. Roy Hayden.
We have already had contact with Egypt. Abraham left the Negev and went to Egypt in the time of famine. Jacob and his whole family settled in Egypt after Joseph, who had been sold as a slave in Egypt, became prime minister there. This same family was still in Egypt several hundred years after the death of Jacob and Joseph. They increased tremendously in that time, and they became a threat to the Egyptians. Exodus 1:8 mentions a new king who did not know Joseph. He saw the Israelites as a threat to Egypt and decided on a plan to reduce the number of people and to limit their growth. They were put to work on building the store cities of Pithom and Ramses. But the plan did not work, because the more the people were oppressed, the more they multiplied. It can be said that Pharaoh made life tough for the Israelites, and the Israelites became tough. Since this plan did not work, Pharaoh decided on a new plan. The Hebrew midwives were instructed to kill every male child at delivery. But the midwives feared God and did not obey. They explained to Pharaoh that the Hebrew women were not like the Egyptians. Before they could arrive, the Hebrew women had already given birth. There may be some truth in this. Here is a Semite woman from an Egyptian painting. Now compare her with a typical Egyptian woman, also from an Egyptian painting. The Semite woman is sturdier and stockier. A son was born to a couple from the tribe of Levi. The boy was hid for a period of 3 months, and then his mother fashioned a basket of reeds, waterproofed it, and placed the basket among the reeds in the Nile River. The daughter of Pharaoh discovered the child and took him for her own. Miriam, an older sister of the baby who had been watching, volunteered the services of her mother as a nurse for the baby. Thus the child's own mother was allowed to care for him until he was weaned, perhaps 3 or 4 years of age. The popular etymology of the name of the child is to draw out, meaning that he was drawn out of the water. But Moses is probably the same element found in such names as Thutmoses or Achmoses, and means to give birth. One day when Moses was grown up, he was then 40 years of age, he saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew. He killed the Egyptian and hid his body in the sand. The next day he tried to break up a dispute between 2 Hebrews. One of the men made a remark that revealed to Moses that his murder of the Egyptian was known. He fled the country of Egypt and went to the land of Midian. Moses lived in this land for 40 years. During that time he married a woman named Zipporah, and she bore him 2 sons, Gershom and Eleazar. One day as Moses was tending his sheep, he saw a bush burning. As he continued to watch, he became aware that the bush was not consumed by the fire. He went closer for a better look. God spoke to him and told him to take off his shoes from the area where he was standing was holy ground. It was here that Moses received his call to go to Egypt to bring deliverance to his people. A summary of this can be found on page 156 of the text. Several years ago, Oswald Hoffman, speaker for the Lutheran Hour, preached a sermon entitled, "God Calls and Man Stalls." This was Moses. He had several reasons why he was not qualified. He claimed he was not qualified. God said, "I will be with you." Then he claimed lack of knowledge about God. And even if he knew, he doubted his ability to convey this information to the people. God revealed himself as the I Am. Next, he claimed that the people would not believe him. So God gave him 3 signs with which to convince the people. He also said he could not speak well. God told him that he had created him and he would be with him. Finally, Moses suggested that God send somebody else. God did not release Moses, but did provide help for him in the form of his brother Aaron. Moses started for Egypt to carry out the will of God. With him was his wife Zipporah and his son. At a lodging place, the Lord met them and sought to kill Moses. The command given to Abraham as a part of the covenant was that every male be circumcised. Moses had not done this. Zipporah took the matter into her own hands. She circumcised the child and saved Moses. Moses met Aaron, and the 2 of them went to Egypt to present their case to Pharaoh. The request was, "Let my people go, that they may hold a feast to me in the wilderness." But Pharaoh did not recognize the Lord. He asked, "Who is the Lord that I should heed his voice and let Israel go?" His conclusion, as a result of this request, was that the Israelites had too much time on their hands. That was why they wanted to go into the wilderness to hold a feast. He determined that the Israelites would have to do just as much work, that is, produce the same number of brick, but straw would not be furnished to them for this purpose. They would have to gather their own straw. Thus the task was made harder for the Israelites as a result of this first meeting of Moses with Pharaoh. Moses, of course, was very disturbed. He went to the Lord and asked why this was happening and why God had even sent him. But God confirmed his word to Moses. He said, "Now you shall see what I will do to Pharaoh." The context indicates that God was in complete control. He had a purpose in all this. He intended to show his power to the Egyptians, but not only to them, but to everyone who would come into contact with the Israelites. Moses met Pharaoh a second time. At this meeting, Moses and Aaron demonstrated their power. God had said, "When Pharaoh says to you, 'Prove yourselves by working a miracle,' then you shall say to Aaron, 'Take your rod and cast it down before Pharaoh, that it may become a serpent.'" This is what happened. But Pharaoh summoned the wise men and the sorcerers, and they also did the same by their secret arts. But Aaron's rod swallowed up their rods. Still Pharaoh's heart was hardened, and he would not listen to them, as the Lord had said. Then began a series of plagues. There are 10 plagues in all that came upon the Egyptians as a result of this confrontation. These are summarized for you on pages 157 and 159. A very significant observation is made in that material. The magicians may counterfeit, but they cannot counterman. Look at the plagues. Already we have seen that the Egyptians were able to turn their rods into serpents. They are able to turn water into blood. And they are able to make frogs appear. However, they cannot make the polluted water pure, nor can they make the frogs disappear. In the third plague with gnats, the magicians are not able to duplicate this. They themselves are the ones who say in 8:19, "This is the finger of God. But Pharaoh's heart was hardened, and he would not listen to them, as the Lord had said. Moses was warned before he went to Pharaoh that the job would not be easy. The reason for this, of course, is that God wanted to display his power, to demonstrate that he and he alone was God. Moses made his demands known little by little. At the first meeting, Moses told Pharaoh that the God of Israel, Yahweh, had commanded, "Let my people go, that they may hold a feast to me in the wilderness." After the plague of flies, Pharaoh said that the Israelites could go and sacrifice within the land. But Moses said that was impossible. They must go 3 days' journey into the wilderness. Several other times Pharaoh promised to let the people go, but when the plague was removed, he changed his mind. Or from a different perspective, God hardened his heart. Prior to the plague of locusts, Pharaoh summoned Moses and said, "Go, serve the Lord your God." But who are to go? When Moses said everyone would go, Pharaoh would not consent. If just the men went, then he would agree. When the plague of darkness came, Pharaoh said Moses could take the people, including the children, but the flocks and herds must remain. Finally, with the last plague, he agreed to the demands of Moses. The other plagues are the death of the cattle, boils, hail, and fire, locusts, and darkness, and finally, the death of the firstborn. In some of these, there is a distinction made between the Israelites and the Egyptian. Beginning with the plague of flies, a geographical distinction is made. Goshen, where the Israelites are, is set apart. No flies appeared, and the cattle did not die in Goshen. In some cases, a distinction was made by faith or obedience. For example, in chapter 9, verse 19, "Now therefore send, get your cattle and all that you have in the field into safe shelter, for the hail shall come down upon every man and beast that is in the field, and is not brought home, and they shall die." Then he who feared the word of the Lord among the servants of Pharaoh made his slaves and his cattle flee into the houses. But he who did not regard the word of the Lord left his slaves and cattle in the field. The last plague is the death of the firstborn. This is tied in very closely with an event called the Passover. In chapter 11, God said to Moses, "Yet one plague more I will bring upon Pharaoh and upon Egypt. Afterwards he will let you go hence. When he lets you go, he will drive you away completely. Speak now in the hearing of the people, that they ask every man of his neighbor, and every woman of her neighbor, jewelry of silver and of gold." Unfortunately, in some translations, the Israelites are said to have borrowed these gifts from the Egyptians. This is not what they are doing at all. They are about to leave Egypt. According to the custom of that time, gifts were generally given to people who were leaving. The Israelites went to the Egyptians and asked for gifts. They did not intend to return these. They asked that gold, silver, and other precious commodities be given to them by the Egyptians. The Scripture says that in this way they spoiled the Egyptians. Much of this material appeared later in the building of the tabernacle. The death of the firstborn, as I have already mentioned, is connected with the Passover. The Lord said to Moses and Aaron in the land of Egypt, "This month shall be for you the beginning of months. It shall be the first month of the year for you. Tell all the congregation of Israel that on the 10th day of this month they shall take every man a lamb according to their father's houses, a lamb for a household. And if the household is too small for a lamb, then a man and his neighbor next to his house shall take according to the number of persons. According to what each can eat, you shall make your count for the lamb. Your lamb shall be without blemish, a male, a year old. You shall take it from the sheep or from the goats, and you shall keep it until the 14th day of this month. when the whole assembly of the congregation of Israel shall kill their lambs in the evening. Then they shall take some of the blood, and put it on the 2 doorposts and the lintel of the houses in which they eat them. They shall eat the flesh that night, roasted. With unleavened bread and bitter herbs they shall eat it. This was an act of faith. This was the basis for the salvation of the nation of Israel. Moses told the people, "This night the death angel shall pass over. Wherever there is blood applied to the doorposts and lintels, the death angel will pass. He will not harm anyone in the house." This feast of Passover is celebrated every year. It is one of the major feasts in Israel and in Jewish communities throughout the world. However, they do not sacrifice a lamb and apply the blood to the doorposts. They merely commemorate the Passover in Egypt. This was the only time that the blood was applied to the door, because that was the only time that the death angel was involved. The Israelites were to eat the lamb with unleavened bread. They would not have time to prepare the bread in the usual manner. They would have to leave quickly. At midnight, the Lord killed all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, from the firstborn of Pharaoh who sat on the throne, to the firstborn of the captive who was in the dungeon, and all the firstborn of the cattle. The Egyptians wanted to get rid of the Israelites. Pharaoh summoned Moses and Aaron by night and said, "Rise up, go forth from among my people, both you and the people of Israel, and go, serve the Lord as you have said. Take your flocks and your herds, as you have said, and be gone, and bless me also." The Israelites began the Exodus. It is very difficult to determine the exact route of the Exodus. The Bible says that they crossed the Reed Sea, generally translated the Red Sea, Yom Suf in Hebrew. There have been at least 9 different sites suggested for the location of the Reed Sea. Some have placed it close to the Mediterranean Sea, along Lake Serbonus, pictured here. Others, one of the 2 bays near Port Said. Some put it close to Ismailia at Lake Timsah. Others prefer either the small or the large Bitter Lakes. Some have even suggested the Gulf of Eilat and the Gulf of Suez. According to the Bible, they crossed the Reed Sea. Pharaoh again changed his mind and pursued the Israelites. The Lord drove the sea back by a strong east wind all night and made the sea dry land, and the waters were divided. And the people of Israel went into the midst of the sea on dry ground, the waters being a wall to them on their right hand and on their left. When the army of Pharaoh tried to pursue, the waters returned, and the army was drowned. Exodus 15 is a beautiful poem ascribed to Moses. It describes in poetic language the story given in narrative form in chapter 14. Miriam also sang a song. She led the women in a dance. Exodus 15:21 says, "Sing to the Lord, for he has triumphed gloriously. The horse and his rider he has thrown into the sea." Next is described the journey to Sinai. Several places are mentioned where the Israelites encamped, but the route is hard to determine. They first entered the wilderness of Shur. The word Shur in Hebrew means wall, and maybe it designated the line of forts erected by the Egyptians on their desert frontier, from Migdol near the Mediterranean coast in the north to the Gulf of Suez in the south. Pictured is a sandy and rocky desert landscape in northern Sinai. At Marah, the waters were bitter. Moses sweetened the waters with a tree. Then they came to Elim, where there were 12 springs of water and 70 palm trees. The wilderness of Sin was traversed, and the Israelites arrived at Rephidim, where Israel fought against Amalek. Rephidim is traditionally associated with Jebel Hassuna in the Wadi Feiran. This is a view of Jebel Hassuna. Israel next entered the wilderness of Sinai and came to Mount Sinai. This journey, though not a very long one, served to bring out the true character of the people of Israel. Soon after they left Elim, the congregation of the people of Israel murmured against Moses and Aaron and said, "Would that we had died by the hand of the Lord in the land of Egypt, when we sat by the flesh pots and ate bread to the full. For you have brought us out into this wilderness to kill this whole assembly with hunger." This became the theme song of the Israelites. It was repeated again and again. God promised bread and meat to the Israelites. He gave manna for bread and quail for meat. The student should read the article on quail on page 189. Other articles of interest are large numbers, pages 191 and 192, and names of God, pages 157 and 158. Mount Sinai is also very difficult to locate. There is the traditional site of Jebel Musa, pictured here, but others prefer Sin Visher, which is now on the screen. At least 13 different locations of Mount Sinai have been suggested. At Mount Sinai, the law was given to Moses. Included in this material were directions for building the tabernacle or tent of meeting. While Moses was on the mountain conversing with God, Aaron fashioned a golden calf and presented it to the people as their God. When Moses returned, he was enraged. He threw the law tablets down and broke them. He went a second time to the top of the mountain and received again the law on new tablets. Chapter 35 describes the construction of the tabernacle. This includes the gathering of materials, the selection of the workmen, the making of the curtains and framework, and the manufacture of the furnishings, an ark or chest, a table, lampstand, altar of incense, and garments for the priests. The student should read the article on pages 167 and 168. The book of Leviticus is concerned mainly with the sacrificial system. There will be a special lecture devoted to sacrifice. Now read the article on pages 172 through 182. There are several short articles: the sacrificial system, clean and unclean animals, the meaning of blood sacrifice, and feasts and festivals. Pay particular attention to the article on literary criticism in the Old Testament, pages 182 to 184. This material will be discussed in class to be sure that it is understood. Numbers takes its name from the fact that a census is contained in the book. But the subject that is central to the book is the wilderness wanderings of the Israelites. The first 10 chapters describe the preparations for the march from Sinai. Chapters 10 to 21 are concerned with the journey from Sinai to Moab. Within this section are some very interesting events. Miriam and Aaron opposed Moses in chapter 12. Spies were sent out in chapter 13. The rebellion and death of Korah, Dathan, and Abiram is described in chapter 16, and the deaths of Miriam and Aaron in chapter 20. It was the reaction of the people to the report of the 12 spies that determined the extended stay in the wilderness. 10 of the spies brought back a negative report. The land was excellent, but the people were too strong to be conquered. Two spies, Caleb and Joshua, were positive that the land could be taken. The people accepted the negative report, and as a result, were made to wander about until that unfaithful generation died off. The actual conquest began in the Negev with the defeat of the king of Arad at Hormah. This may be that site. Then the Israelites defeated Sihon, king of the Amorites, and Og, king of Bashan, in the area commonly called Transjordan. The Israelites were now in the area near Jericho. Balak, king of Moab, realized that he could not defeat Israel with military strength, so he called Balaam to put a curse on Israel. God intervened, and the curse became a blessing instead. Joshua was appointed the successor to Moses. The book of Deuteronomy is the record of Moses' farewell addresses to Israel. Because Moses had sinned when he struck the rock to obtain water, and took credit to himself rather than giving credit to God, he was not allowed to enter the promised land. Joshua would lead the people in. These addresses of Moses reflect the entire history of Israel from their entry into the wilderness to their preparation to enter the promised land. Moses exhorted the people to follow the law and gave them instructions concerning the renewal of the covenant on Mount Ebal near Shechem. The death of Moses is recorded in chapter 34. In this lecture, we have been concerned with the Exodus, which is Israel's escape from slavery in Egypt, the giving of the law, the building of the tabernacle, and the preparation for entry into the promised land. The call of Moses was emphasized, as well as the conflict of God with the Egyptians. The Passover was linked with Israel's salvation. Some of the problems encountered were the identification of the Sea of Reeds and the route of the Exodus. The date of the Exodus is also a problem, but that was not discussed in this lecture.
This has been a video presentation of Bible Survey, Unit Number 11, entitled Egypt and the Exodus. This program has been produced by the Department of Educational Media of Oral Roberts University.